Welcome to the Wimbo Worldwide F1 podcast.
F1 content around the globe.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wimbo's Worldwide F1 podcast, episode 7, because it's July. And with me today, I have a guest from Canada, Calgary to be precise. His name is Damien, but he's also known as Clapped on Twitter. He is a big Max Verstappen fan, and that's how we got in contact, because Damien just loves to wind people up on Twitter. And that's why I thought it was suitable to talk about F1 in Canada with Damien. Welcome.
Thank you.
So how's it going?
It's going okay, I guess. I'm happy with the season so far. Very happy.
Yeah, of course, if you're a Max Verstappen fan, then you have no complaints. But first, let us talk about Canada. Now, what I know about Canada is that it's all about ice hockey or hockey. And especially since you're from Canada, I suppose that's a big thing where you're from.
Yeah, hockey here is like a religion. Everybody loves it, and it's pretty much all anyone talks about in terms of sports.
Yeah. And what's the team from Calgary called?
They're called the Flames.
The Calgary Flames.
Yeah.
And are they winning anything or?
No, they're very mediocre. They're like I don't know, like Alpine or Alpine or whatever you want to call them.
Okay. So they make a lot of promises. They have a 5-year plan. And
they don't make any promises. They just make very middle ground moves. They never go for it, and they manage their assets really poorly.
Okay. So, but what about F1 itself then? Is that a thing in Canada? Like, did Drive to Survive help it a little bit, or?
Not really, actually. Not many people here follow F1 or care about motorsport in general. So that's kind of why I went to Twitter. I got like a couple friends that casually watch, but most people here just don't pay attention to motorsport.
No, and does Canada have their own motorsport at all? Like, I don't know, ice speedway or
No. Like the closest thing to Canada for motorsport would be there's a couple races here. Like there's the Montreal Grand Prix, and then there's the Toronto Indy, which is just like way worse than F1. But if anyone here follows motorsport, most of them follow NASCAR.
Yeah. Because I don't know, like, is it far from the American border or?
It's like 5 hours from where I am, but where I was born originally, which was in Toronto, it's only like 2 hours from the U.S. border.
Toronto.
Yeah.
I love the way how you say that, Toronto.
That's what's called Toronto.
You know who used to say that? Nicholas Latifi. He used to say Toronto.
That's how we all say it.
Yeah. Go Tiffy. Do you miss him?
He made it more interesting, but I don't think he was ever going to do much more than he did. So
no, he was there to save Williams from going broke, but not for the racing.
Yeah, he saved Max too.
He saved Max too. And yeah. I can honestly say that Nicholas Latifi made me cry, because, I remember that race well. I was sitting watching in the living room with my wife, and I said, Samantha, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And then she goes, yeah, but there's 10 more rounds. Anything can happen. I was about to punch her, like, but what the hell do you know? And then, wait a minute, there's a safety car. Latifi crashed. Yeah, we don't need to go over the rest, but that was magical. And then there's Lance Stroll, but they're from Montreal.
Yeah.
The Stroll family. They don't speak French in Canada, in Calgary, do they? It's not
as common. Like Quebec is the most French-speaking
Yeah.
place in Canada, but then there's a few other places just east of Quebec. There's a province called New Brunswick. They're very French-speaking as well. As you spread out towards the western side of Canada, it becomes less common, but there are still several people here who speak French.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was traveling, I was talking to this guy, and he had like what I thought was a US accent, because I didn't know the differences yet. And then next thing I know, he's sitting in the lounge of the youth hostel where I was, and he was speaking French fluently. So I said, "Wow, an American that speaks French! That's amazing!" And he looked at me like he swallowed a bug, and he goes, "I'll have you know, I'm Canadian."
Yeah.
And they hated Canadians
Yeah,
to
I
be
mean,
called.
I don't mind too much. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been throughout the US plenty of times, and there's a lot of similarities that we have, but then there's a lot of differences
Yeah.
too. So
No, so from that moment, I knew if you meet like a quiet American, one that isn't so over the top and loud, it's usually a Canadian.
that's pretty fair. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you see them walking outside with a backpack, then you just look at the backpack, because they usually have a little Canadian flag on it to
Yep.
prevent to be called Canadian. But I've only met really nice Canadians so far, on my travels. But that's what the Canadians are known for anyway, always being nice and saying sorry.
Very apologetic.
Yeah. But it's an amazing country, and I definitely want to go there. Maybe even to the Grand Prix. So now, what I've heard from you is that you have a passion for race cars and that you've built one yourself. Is that right?
Yep. Cars are like my favorite thing to talk about or experience. I kind of look at cars like they're art in a way. Some people look at cars and they see a way to get to work and back, but I look at it and I'm like, okay, this is a really unique opportunity, right? Because maybe 150 years ago, we didn't have cars. Very few people would have. And then let's just say 150 years from now, with the direction the world's going, we probably won't have many people driving cars. So we live in this unique little bubble where you have the opportunity to like experience cars fully as a human being. So I built, and I'm still in the process of building and working on my car, which is it's from Japan, imported, and it's a 2002 Blob-i STI from Subaru. But basically nothing in the car is Subaru anymore. It's all been, I'd say about 25% of it is just custom fabricated stuff, which was the hardest part, because trying to measure something, like if you're trying to measure something in your house, like a wall distance, it's pretty obvious. It's just a straight line. But trying to measure where three-dimensional pipes need to fit, it's very difficult. So I definitely made a good amount of mistakes during that portion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been working on it for a while now, and I plan on actually having content for it as soon as I'm done, which should be by the end of this summer.
Okay, yeah, and you're still deciding on what platform you're going to use. Yeah. Well, if it's short form, then you can put it on YouTube and TikTok, and then
I think I'll
just
start with that.
and then see where it goes best.
Yeah, because I think it'll be interesting enough for people that appreciate cars like I do. From factory, those cars, back when they were produced, they were making about 280 or so horsepower. Mine makes just around 530. So I've almost doubled it, which is it's a pretty big feat to
And
do and
and
keep it reliable.
and can you go full speed anywhere in Canada, or is there speed limits everywhere?
Speed limits everywhere, but there are several different type of tracks that are all around me. There's oval tracks. There's also like bendy, twisty circuit type tracks. There's drag strips, although I wouldn't drag race my car, but there's lots of opportunities to push it to the limit for sure.
So, but you were saying about building and customizing things yourself, but like, are you a big fan of that TV show called I think it's called Wheelers Dealers?
I
Um,
haven't seen it.
okay, well, there's this there's two English guys, and one of them is a former McLaren technician or engineer. His name is Mark Priestley, and the other guy, the more the presenter type of guy, he goes out and he finds this really old Range Rover, and then he makes a deal with this guy to buy it for cheap, and then they sort of fix it up all together, and then they're trying to sell it for profit. I think you'd enjoy that show, so look it up on YouTube.
On YouTube? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's called Wheelers Dealers, but after the podcast, I'll try to Google it and I'll give you a link. So this season, are you enjoying this season as a Max Verstappen fan? Because at the minute, show the people at home your hat. Yeah, I've got a bunch of them here as well.
Yeah, this.
I got orange.
I don't have one like that.
Yeah, but I'm going to Zandvoort, so you need an orange one then.
Very lucky. I wish I could be going there.
Yeah. What do you actually think when you see that whole group of orange? You know, the 80, 90,000 people.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think I think that's what sport's all about. I know other people have their opinions, but the only reason we watch sports in general is to feel something and have some sort of emotional connection, whether it's winning, losing. And when you see, 100,000 people dressed in orange with orange smoke all cheering for the same person, it's like, any one of those people could walk past each other in the street and they might not agree on everything, but for that event, they're all unified.
Yes.
That's what sports is about.
But what annoys me is that instead of saying what you just said, that it sort of makes a connection, the British media, they turn that around and they call it tribalism.
No, I'm not a fan of British media at all. I'm always on Twitter bashing it.
Yeah, but you can't get around it if you follow F1 because the best channels, the best broadcasting is from Britain, and they're not all the same. But you just notice it in the tone, or in how much certain things get highlighted. I bet in the past when the tifosi in Italy were throwing flares on track by accident, it didn't get the attention that those things get when a fan in orange does it.
No, it's because it doesn't suit what they want, right? Like they're obviously going to have their own bias and they're going to want the British drivers to do well, which is fine. But to keep it professional, they should just report on who is doing well. And part of the problem I find with Sky specifically is, let's say Ferrari fans were doing the same thing as the Orange Army, but Ferrari wasn't winning. If they weren't winning, I don't think they'd have anything to say about it.
No.
It's because Max is winning, they're not happy about it, so they'll say something about it.
Yeah. And I also think, with Britain being pretty much the most important nation when it comes to Formula One, I think the crowd feels sort of threatened by another group, a big, massive group, sort of invading their space. They could cope with the tifosi being so passionate and all dressed in red and having their flares and stuff. But now there's a new group and they're popping up everywhere. I think there's 7 specially made Max Verstappen stands all over the season. I think the latest one is in Las Vegas. So I think they feel threatened, and that's why they're pushing that narrative of us being bad fans. But I was in Austria a couple of weeks ago, and it was nothing but fun and laughter and people together, and there was a group of men lighting flares, and they turned out to be Austrian Red Bull fans. And at one point, I was smelling a lot of dope, the smell of marijuana, and it was actually 4 German lads sitting smoking weed behind me. So all the stuff that the Dutch have the bad reputation for was actually done by people from different countries.
I would just embrace it, honestly. Um, back to ice hockey for a second here. In 2005, when Sidney Crosby was getting drafted, he was considered to be the next greatest thing since Wayne Gretzky, which is everyone calls him the statistical goat of hockey, and I mean I'm not going to disagree. But when Crosby was getting drafted the year before that, they had a lockout, which meant the season didn't happen over money. So all the draft picks from 2004 were starting the same year as 2005. And in that 2004 draft, there was a Russian player named Alex Ovechkin. And the Canadian media fueled this sort of fake rivalry between the two of them for decades. It's almost been 2 decades now. And at first, every single thing he did was wrong. It was bad. And Canadians across the country were like, oh, I like Crosby. I hate Ovechkin. And I'm just like, why though? Like, Ovechkin's an incredible hockey player. He's actually on the verge of breaking the all-time goal record that stood since like the 80s. No one's even come close, and he's about to break it. Not to say that I would say he's actually better than Crosby. I think the media was right, and Crosby was probably better. But the hate he got for being Russian was insane. It reminds me a lot of how Max and anybody else, like Sebastian, received when they were dominating. Alonso as well, yeah. And it's just like, I think if you're a fan of a sport, like truly a fan of the sport, you should just appreciate everyone that's done really well, regardless if they're your nationality or not.
Yeah.
It helps grow the sport. It helps add contrast and comparison to the sport. And I mean, really, like, everyone talks about dominance all the time. The sport is no fun if just the same people win every single time. So it's nice to have a change. And Max in F1 is that change right now. We went through a long time, like 8 years of Mercedes just running the show. And then Max finally gets a car that's competitive, and now we see what happens, right? So
yeah. Well, I would have embraced Hamilton if he was a little bit more likable, like Jensen Button, or like a David Coulthard, or there's plenty of much more likable British drivers. But when I started watching in 2015, I usually didn't even make it to the podium ceremony because I was watching for Max. And then slowly, I started learning all the ins and outs, and I never watched the after shows or anything. So it took me about 10, 12 races to realize that that guy doing the interviews and saying that they've got the best crowd out there, that was Hamilton, and that the blonde guy that he was driving with was Nico Rosberg. And that's when I started noticing that he said the same thing every race. And that when there was an accident, it was never his fault. And my dislike to the persona that is Lewis Hamilton, that started growing then. And I wasn't even invested in who won or who didn't, So it didn't come out of nowhere. My dislike of Lewis Hamilton. But then, I always left it alone until the two of them started battling in 2021, because that's when the shit hit the fan, you know? And, sometimes I wish Formula One was a little bit more like hockey, where if two guys have beef, they throw down the gloves and take off the helmet, and they beat the shit out of each other. Because what happened the last race, or what was it, in Austria, where they started snitching on each other? Like the FIA has technology in the lines to see if somebody is in or out, and these guys are driving 200 miles an hour, and they can tell if somebody was exceeding track limits or not. And then they're snitching. And I stopped watching football, or you would call it soccer.
Soccer.
because these guys are on the floor all the time, grabbing their ankle, even if they were hit on their elbow. But that's happening in Formula One as well now.
Yeah, uh, it's not a good look when drivers are sort of disingenuous, right? Like when you say that the crowd at every race is the best crowd. I know what you're talking about. I wouldn't say I dislike Hamilton. I'd say I'm pretty middle ground on him, even though everyone on my Twitter would not believe me when I say that because all I do is make fun of him. But it's really just because the fans that are on Twitter are horrendous, and it's just easy to get them going, and it's fun. But I think my honest opinion on Hamilton is probably just, there's a guy that came into the sport. He had a good entry to the sport. A lot of preparation and a lot of stock went into him, but he delivered. He did really well his rookie season, and like incredibly well. And every year thereafter, he's had a very competitive year. Mind you, he's had some of the best luck in terms of having the cars to perform, but it still takes a guy to show up every Sunday and put in the work and perform, right? We can see that with Perez. Perez is clearly not able to show up and put in, lap after lap like Max or Lewis have. So I respect Lewis's talent. I just think that sometimes people get a little sort of carried away without context, and they don't really want to acknowledge the fact that there was, for 6 of his 7 titles, very little competition. And everybody says, oh, well, Rosberg was there. And it's like, okay, but even still, he had to have an engine blow up just for Nico to win.
Yeah.
And, and everyone talks about Valtteri, and it's just a joke if you think that was competition. Now, I'm not saying Max has had some elite level competition, but this is Formula One.
Well, did you see my latest video?
I haven't.
Okay, well, are you subscribed? Are you subscribed?
Am I subscribed?
Are you
I don't have a YouTube channel.
No, you can just log in with Google and you have a channel.
Fair, but I don't use YouTube very often.
Well, you're going to use it from now on. But
I'll
anyway,
subscribe.
Yeah. No, my latest video is called Max Verstappen. I don't even know what it's called because I changed the title 3 times now. But anyway, it's about how people say that Max Verstappen has no competition within the team, and that the GOATs, Schumacher, Senna, and Hamilton did have a lot of competition. So I made a list of all the drivers Schumacher drove with. Now, there's some names that you've never even heard of. He drove with Martin Brundle. He drove with Johnny Herbert, the 2 pundits.
Yep.
Maybe won a handful of races. That wasn't really competition either,
No.
And then Schumacher always had contracts written out where he got the first upgrades and drivers weren't allowed to sort of compete with him. Barrichello had to let him through, and then he was put on the top step. And then Senna had one really, really great teammate, and that was Alain Prost.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, have you ever heard of Johnny Dumfries? Have you heard of a guy called something like De Cicero, or I don't even remember the names, but they were all sort of small time drivers as well, as far as I know. So
yeah.
he didn't have a great competition either. And then Lewis Hamilton got beaten by Button. And you could say, well, Button is a world champion, but Button needed the double diffuser in the Braun GP car. Something they were the only team to have that for the first half of the season. And that's why he won the championship. And the rest of his career was really good and decent. But, Jenson Button is not considered one of the GOATs in F1.
No.
And then neither is Rosberg, even though he won 1 championship against Lewis. And then Lewis Hamilton had Heikki Kovalainen, which was not one of the best. And he got beaten by George Russell. So if you add it all up, all these drivers, the great drivers, they had decent teammates, but they all made them look bad because they were so good.
Exactly. And people are very hung up on the whole, it's the car or equal machinery or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, if you want to watch that type of racing, then go watch a spec series. Like
Yeah,
F1 isn't a spec series. And you will always have parity between different teams in the way they develop and the direction they take. And you'll have teams that nail it and you'll have teams that miss the mark. And as far as teammates go, you pretty much nailed it when you said that the greats make their teammates look poor. And I think, it's not really like a whataboutism type thing I'm going to say, but if Rosberg doesn't win in 2016, nobody talks about him in the same respect. They would
no.
just say the same thing they say about Bottas. So, I mean, like, it's easy to say, oh, well, he had Rosberg because he won. But had he not won, nobody would be talking
No.
about it.
And then again,
So,
I don't think it's a flex if you say uh, Nico Rosberg won 6 races in a row against Lewis Hamilton. It just shows that, the last 2 races of the season, Hamilton wasn't completely there because he was already champion. And then in the first, say, 4 races of the season, he wasn't really there because he wasn't sort of fully charged yet. And that's something that Max always is. From the moment he steps into that car, whether it's sim racing or um, one of the funny races he does with the Red Bull team or Formula One racing, free practice one, the first push lap, he's there
yeah, it's
always.
unique.
And that's why I understand him when he says, I don't want to do this until I'm 40 because he's been pushing hard since he was 5 years old, 6 years old. I totally get it.
I don't blame him at all if he retires. I mean, I'm not sure if I would feel any different in his position, right? I mean, you've worked so hard to get somewhere, then you get to the place you were working to get to, and then you absolutely live your dreams out. You start setting records. You get 15 wins in a season. He's on track right now. He could break that record. He's won this year. Should be 3 world titles. Really, what is there to do other than just chase records? And
Yeah.
when you're a person that, when he has other interests outside of Formula One, he likes his sim racing team. He has talked about maybe doing, endurance racing, even some rally racing. I mean, why not?
Yeah.
What do you have to prove anymore, right? We talk about guys like Senna and, we talk about Senna and Prost and stuff like that, and we say that they're in the all-time great list. And I know the point scoring system was different, and the way championships were decided was different, but really, Senna only has 3. So he's considered by a lot of people the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Max could retire with 3 or 4, and he'll still be in the conversation. He'll be firmly placed in that tier.
Yeah.
And the thing that people need to remember, too, is it's so subjective, right? Like, we're picking apart less than a tenth of a second with all these guys. It's just to say that there's like the greatest of all time. I think in motorsport it's next to impossible
Well,
because there's so many variables.
like everybody can decide what their own criteria are for calling somebody the GOAT. But for me, it's more like a vibe, more like a vibe they give off of what they actually do for racing and what they present. So Prost would never be my GOAT because he was called the professor. He would finish races P4, P5 if he knew that we're getting the championship.
Yeah,
And then Senna, I think he's probably my GOAT because he was going for it so much that he once crashed in Monaco, even after getting told to slow down. But he couldn't because he was always given 100%. That
that's
sort
what I love
of
about
different
that.
mindset is what makes the GOAT for me. And
Yeah,
Michael Schumacher, um, he he was relentless in getting everything organized the way he wanted, and that's how he got the hardest team in the world to score um, championships, and that was Ferrari. By getting the right people in, and I have a lot of respect for that as well, even though he could be a real bastard on the track, And one of my wishes is to see, hopefully one day is like, oh my God, GP, Max Verstappen's, what do you call it, engineering. He, he's going to Ferrari. Oh my God, Christian Horner is going to Ferrari. And then after a while, Max Verstappen walks out of his contract in 2028, and he says, "Yeah, I'm gonna join Ferrari for another 2 years to join Christian Horner and GP." And then when they have that team together and Max Verstappen wins a championship at Ferrari, then he can retire as the ultimate GOAT.
I would love that.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, I would love that.
And the Tifosi, first they're singing songs about Max's mom, and then they'll cherish him forever.
Yeah, no. I think, when I think about the GOAT, I don't really have a definitive answer. I mean, I could probably agree with you and say Senna, but what I think, it's too early to call Max anything, but I think what I like about Max is, like you said, as soon as he gets in the car, he's already at the limit, and he finds it right away, and he keeps it there. And he doesn't race for anything other than first place. He doesn't accept anything but. He pushes the entire time. He's aggressive. A lot of people like to use that as a negative talking point, his aggression and his relentlessness. But that's, in my opinion, what it makes him so attractive as a racer, right? That's why I really can get behind him, because he's aggressive. He goes for it. He doesn't just sit back. It's not fun to watch a guy, not to bash on Hamilton, but in Spain, I think it was Spain, where he had the lap one contact last year, and he was like, I would just retire the engine.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Max would literally never say that.
No.
Max would be cursing and swearing, yelling at GP, and somehow he'd make a big comeback drive. And at the end, maybe he gets P2 or something like that. And at the end, he'd be laughing on the radio, being like, oh, that was a good race, guys, even though he was furious 40 minutes before. But that's what makes Max so great, right? Like, he's not fake, very genuine in his emotions.
Yeah. Totally agree.
So,
and you could see that in Max's first season. I'm not sure. I think it was in Malaysia where Max had an incident and he was a lap down, and he kept pushing, and then there was a safety car, so he lost the lap that he was down, and he started overtaking everybody. And for some reason, Carlos Sainz, who was still a baby then as well, because Carlos Sainz is only a year older than Max, was behind him, and he had a little bit more pace. And they went over the radio and said, Max, let Sainz by. And he went, no! And he just didn't do it. It was a snot-nosed kid, 17 years old, just didn't obey team orders because, he fought for that position, to get himself at P7, and he wasn't going to give it up.
No, exactly. And that's, people can say what they want, but that's why I cheer for Max, because it's, you could say, oh, he's a bad teammate or he's selfish or whatever. No problem. Schumacher is the same thing. Doesn't matter. Winners win,
Yeah, winners win. So, have you got any other favorites this season that you're rooting for?
Yeah, obviously Max being my favorite driver, it's a good season for me. But after Max, I really want Yuki to do well. I really like seeing him bring that alpha where it's not supposed to be, especially compared to what Nick was doing. So I like seeing Yuki do well. One of my favorites before this season, but when Max was still racing, I really liked Kimi, but he's gone. So other than Max and Yuki, I do like seeing Charles do well. I think he's just had a really rough year and a half, and it kind of sucks to see him have all the bad luck he's had. So I like seeing him when he does do well. But, if you follow my Twitter, I make fun of him a lot, too. Every time he crashes, I would have 2 weeks worth of memes. But I do like seeing Charles do well as well. I don't really dislike any driver other than George Russell. I just no time for that guy.
No? No love for
No,
George.
no love for George. Every chance I get, I'll make fun of him.
Yeah, well, he suits that corporate Mercedes way of thinking. You know, everything is public relations and everything is thought out. And
Yeah, I
uh,
don't like it.
no, you know, every team radio, like if he starts talking about the weather, he knows it's going to be broadcast, and he loves it. You know,
Yeah,
and they're like his shirtless pictures on his social media. You know, George Muscles. That's what he keeps doing as well.
yeah, and you know what's funny? It's like when you look at Mercedes, both Lewis and George, they're very all about the image,
Yeah,
public relations imagery the whole time. And then when you look at Max and Yuki, they're known as like temper tantrum children, and people make fun of them for it. But I think they're just real,
yeah,
you know. So I like those two the best. Those would be my two drivers.
yeah. Last week I saw an interview with this Welsh guy that works for Channel 4. His name is Jones, obviously. I think his name is Greg Jones or something. A
Okay.
handsome Welsh fella. Um, and in the end, he just started asking stupid, silly, um, normal questions, not sort of F1 related, because he was not getting anything out of Max because he wasn't in the mood to talk a lot of bullshit about all the stuff that he's already talked about before. And yeah, it was a great interview. I enjoyed that, because it's real, and it didn't tick any of the boxes that George Russell or Hamilton would tick in their interviews. So that was
Yeah,
a
you
was a
know,
lot of fun.
I think being like very PR oriented, it appeals to a certain group of people and a certain type of person, and that's why they have as many fans as they do. And it's not even a knock against them. Like I said, I don't even mind Hamilton, but I just prefer when team radio comes on and you hear the driver actually frustrated, actually saying what he wants to say. Like, I try to put myself in that position.
Hmm.
If I was to race, I wouldn't be very happy if I don't know what the wording would be, but if something unfair happened, I would be letting my team know,
Yeah,
right? And even after the race, like you're talking like 5 minutes later, you're just frustrated coming across the line, and then you're going to walk up to the camera and smile and say, "Oh, I had a great time. Thanks all the fans and everyone at the factory." I would just be like, "Yeah, no, I'm frustrated right now. The race was whatever, right?" Like I wouldn't be talking about the factory finishing P3 when it could have been P1. I would have wanted that P1, right?
yeah.
So
So what about Fernando Alonso? Do you follow him?
yeah, I used to when I first got into F1, I would say Alonso was probably my favorite. And I got into F1 two separate times. I started in 2013, just casually watching with some friends from a different province that I was living in at the time. And then I kind of lost interest in 2016 or so. Just wasn't piquing my interest anymore. And I took about a year and a half break. I came back in 2018, and Max had already been, you know, terrorizing the grid at this point. And I kept up with the highlights from the years I missed, and was interested in Max at that time. And when I came back, it was just all right. We're Max fans now, so I stuck with him since probably the beginning of 2018 until now.
Yeah,
And the thing I like, I would say I used to cheer for Fernando a lot, but I didn't really care if he won or lost. Whereas I do care if Max does do well. I do
yeah,
want him to do well. So I find that like, I found the right spot for me to be, the right fan base for me.
yeah. Well, for me, ever since I learned more and more and more about the sport, I can watch a boring race, but still be intrigued by the dynamics going on with tire strategies and um, team dynamics and who scores the last point, and to see how Alpine is doing against McLaren. And I'm always kept really really busy. That's why you don't see an awful lot of tweets from me during the race, because I've got my team viewer for F1 on this computer here right in front of me, and then the big TV over there has the race on. And yeah, I try to suck up as much of the information as I can to follow the race properly. But yeah, I'm always very impressed with Alonso with the overcapacity he has to control and see a race.
Yeah, yeah,
And Max has that too. And then Alonso's team radios are funny as fuck as well. Like maybe I'll do a video one day with the top 10 funniest Fernando Alonso radios, starting with Karma. Uh,
yeah. Or
and
last year's, and was it Spa with Lewis?
yeah, he said, "This guy only knows how to drive from the front."
Yeah, yeah, that one. Yeah, I don't tweet too much during the races either. I do sometimes if it's like if there's a lot like during the Australian one this year, there was so many red flags. So I was like, wow, what's going on? But normally I just kind of watch the race and
Yeah,
do my thing, and then afterwards I'll give my thoughts after. But um, yeah, I don't make a lot of time for tweeting during the race anyway. A
no.
couple, but not a lot.
So looking ahead in this season, what do you think is going to happen? Red Bull's obviously going to win the both prizes, and then Mercedes will probably be second in the constructors. But do you think there will be any other winners than Red Bull drivers?
Um, yeah, I don't think Red Bull wins every race. I know they have the capacity to do it, but a lot of things would have to go right for them. And
Yeah.
I think they would have a better shot at accomplishing that if Checo was in better form. He's just the last 5, 6 races. He's not been great. He's been less than great. He's had okay race pace, but it's pretty hard to have bad race pace in the current car he's in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think his qualifying blunders and his mistakes he's made have been pretty tough for him to swallow, I think. So I can't see us winning every race
No.
because that would mean Max would have to come in first every time. And there's going to be a day where maybe his engine gives up or something, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think my predictions for the season, my optimistic predictions and my hopeful ones are basically I hope Max breaks the 15 win record. I also hope he breaks the 9 wins in a row. I'd like to see him do that. I don't want him to finish any race this year off of the top 2 steps. So I'd rather him DNF than something like P5.
Oh yeah.
As long as it's a safe DNF, like just
Yeah.
mechanical. Crazy. I think Ferrari will probably be the second place in
Yeah.
construction. So the reason I say that is they've brought some decent upgrades and they've claimed to find a lot more stability and with the new tires coming in, they're expecting to help them. They're not too far off now. I think they could make a late charge, especially with how many races are left, to pick up more points than Mercedes will. I just think overall Ferrari has the ability to make a comeback here.
Because I just finished recording a video. I just need to edit it about how the sacking of Mattia Binotto had no effect whatsoever, and that Ferrari is actually worse off with Frederic Vasseur.
I think it looks that way, but
they've got almost 100 points less than last year.
But to be fair, Charles has had some terrible luck with so far to start the season. Carlos has done okay. And the other thing to consider too is they got a lot of their points early last year when Red Bull hadn't really sort of solidified the concept and grown. They've now grown and they're so far ahead. I don't think they could match that pace no matter what. So I think a realistic point drop for them would probably be somewhere like 50 points less if, with the development Red Bull's had. And then when you consider the DNFs that Charles has had and the bad luck he's had, and not all of it's bad luck, some of it was mistakes, but I think Ferrari has it in them to come back. I'm not sure they will, but I want to predict that they do.
It's just Vasseur was hired to help with the development, to get rid of the strategic blunders, to organize the two drivers that they get along. But none of these things have really happened.
No, I think it takes more than one person to correct that issue. Um, like a team, it's really hard to look at one member on a team
But
and say that's the problem.
that's why I would have liked it if Matteo Binotto would be as calm and collected as he is, that he could have just continued the way he was going. But then, there's the higher ups in Ferrari, and I don't think they actually understand the F1. This guy John Elkann has nothing with the F1. He's just business, business, business.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they get
No.
they get another idea in their head, and they just sack somebody and put somebody else in place that listens a little bit better.
Yeah. So just to relate it to something I've watched hockey my entire life. I'm from Toronto, and I cheer for the Leafs. They're terrible. They haven't won a championship since 1967. And everybody else, it makes fun of them. We're probably the most made fun of team in the entire league, but we have, millions of passionate fans, and everyone hates us for it. But for the better part of the 2010s, the Leafs would fire their coach like every year.
Okay.
And just expect a new guy to come in, and just all of a sudden we're going to have a miracle and win everything. And it's just like, it's the same thing, in a way, like with Ferrari getting rid of one person. If you really want to change that team, it has to start at the very top. It's a cultural thing, right? Look at Red Bull, for example. Like the culture Red Bull has, it's just like optimization, efficiency. They like to do a lot of fun team events. They're very organized. They have this sort of like well-oiled machine type culture to them. And then when you look at someone like a team like, say, Mercedes, they're very, like gold standard business class type, briefcase culture. Like they're very to the point, just like Red Bull is, but different. Ferrari don't seem to have that. They sort of just, like, Ferrari seems to be very split. On one hand you have like we're the biggest fan base and we have all the corporate sponsorship and we're all these things, but on the other side they're just like riding that reputation. They don't hire the people that are actually going to make an impact. So to fire one guy, it's just like a half measure. It doesn't actually do anything.
No. This is one thing that I really like about Red Bull as well, is that Mateschitz was friends with Helmut Marko, and he says, you've got the control over the Red Bull team, and then it became two teams, and you report to me, but I won't meddle into things. And then Helmut Marko got Christian Horner involved, and he was left to do a job as well. You know what I mean? And
yeah, they let them
if you put trust in people and you invest a lot of money and you have the patience, then good things will happen. And that's pretty much the opposite of what Ferrari is doing, because they keep shifting and they keep their fingers in the pot all the time. And Alpine is another example. At Renault, if you list the people that have left Renault in the last 6-7 years, Alain Prost left as an advisor, angry. Danny Ricciardo left. Piastri didn't want to drive there. Alonso left. There's people in engineers and stuff that left, and all because this what's his name? Not Valentino Rossi. His last name is Rossi.
Oh, I can't remember his name either.
No. Well, anyway, that guy is such a bully and a dominant guy that nobody wants to work for him, and they keep leaving. And that's why I think when Alpine finishes their 5-year plan, they're just going to invent another 5-year plan, because I don't see them winning races or championships anytime soon.
No, it's so difficult to even envision a team like them climbing up and beating a team like Mercedes, Red Bull on merit. I feel like the benchmark is Mercedes and Red Bull every year. Even though Mercedes had a couple less than optimal years last year and this year, they're still a serious team. They just made a couple mistakes, and it's an unforgiving sport. It's very hard to come back from mistakes technically. So, you'd be foolish to think they're never going to make their way back up. They will. They're going to compete again.
Yeah.
But I can't see the same level of seriousness from teams in the midfield. There's lots of teams with a lot of history in the midfield. Like, Williams was at one point a very, very serious team. But without the support and the right people in those spots, I can't see them climbing back to that status. McLaren was very surprising recently with their level of success.
That was a video I released about 2 weeks ago about Lando Norris, that he should just stick it out with McLaren, because the things that are happening at the higher level there is pretty promising. The people that they've hired, somebody from Ferrari, somebody, and then a guy like James Key, who was pretty much stuck in that one place. He was let go. So I've got high hopes for McLaren to at least compete for podiums at some stage again next year, maybe even this year.
I think so too. And I think I agree with you. I don't think Lando should jump ship. It's really easy to say, oh, he should get the second Red Bull seat, but it's like, in 2026, we have no idea how Red Bull's engine is going to perform. It's a big question mark.
Yeah.
And I go back to Max when he was younger. He's been widely regarded as a top 2 driver for a long time now, and he could have easily jumped ship to Ferrari at some point, like when Sebastian was there. I'm sure they would have taken him. And he would have fought for the title, as people like to have you believe. But he didn't. He stuck it out with that terrible engine that Red Bull had, and he waited and waited, and then the Honda deal happened, and they still didn't get it right for the first year. He still only got, I think it was 2 wins that year. But then in 2021, the car came to life, and he got to sort of like pick the fruits that he waited for, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what McLaren is on track, hopefully, to do something similar. I mean, it's a little early to say they're going to do it, but I think if Lando wants something similar to what Max has now, he has to be part of the solution rather than just jumping to the next team.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest mistake that Alonso made in his career, and that's constantly jumping from one team to the next.
Yeah, just chasing the next best car. But when you really break it down, we're talking about fractions of a second between these cars. Mm-hmm. The gap isn't that big. It's the ability to get a driver to consistently pull out that same gap over 52 or 70 laps, and that's why it looks so bad. Max is putting in, for fun, like 120s the entire race. Other guys aren't. No. And those tenths that they miss here and there, they add up, and then it's really easy to be like, oh, look, Max won by 15 seconds again. All the other cars are slow, and it's like, okay, they're not as fast as the Red Bull, but they're not 15 seconds behind. No. They're, you know what I mean? Like, it's the gap is able to be closed, and I think it will.
Well, I think people are underestimating the relationship between a chief engineer and a driver as well. At the minute, I'm reading How to Build a Car by Adrian Newey.
Okay.
And he explains the relationship he had with those top drivers. And if he develops a car with a pointy nose, because that's the fastest way of getting around a corner, he needs a driver that can handle that. And with Max, he found the perfect driver. And that's literally what he said. He said, Max is the perfect driver for my car. So those guys have been working together, and the feedback that Max gives, he drives 2 laps and he says, I need more of this, or I need more of that. And he knows very specific exactly how to describe what he needs in the car. Whereas other drivers, Sebastian Vettel would rant on for 2 hours about shit and nothing would happen. You know what I mean? But Max is concise and direct, and if he feels nothing, then he'll tell you he feels nothing. Whereas a less secure driver would say something like, yeah, what if we try a little bit more, balance this or balance that, and we'll try this and that. But Max, he doesn't do that. And that's why that car is so fast. And that's why none of the teammates get out of that car what Max can.
No, exactly. He's very at one with the car, and it shows in his performances, week in, week out. He's always, it's very rare for Max to have like a really bad race weekend. And it's funny because the standard that we set as his fans and then the people that hate him, we set such a high bar. So if he finished second, he gets made fun of for like a week, Like when he finished second in Jeddah with the drive shaft issue, he didn't catch Perez from halfway through the race. I'm pretty sure I was on there being like, "What a bum! Like, how did you not catch him?" Even, I'm just joking, but like, like he's just the bar's so high for him, and it's because he does these things so well.
But that's what's so funny about Team LH. They would say stuff like, Max is getting his ass handed to him by Perez. Max needs to watch out because Perez is going to catch him. He's going to have a hard time this season. And then 3-4 races later, it's like, Max doesn't have any good teammates because Perez is shit.
Oh, I know. It's always shifting the goalpost with those guys every time. Like last year when Russell got his first race win, I tweeted immediately like, "Oh, that's a fraudulent win, Mickey Mouse win, doesn't count because Yuki didn't get unlapped." So clearly that can't count. And I think it had like over 7,000 likes and like 500 retweets, and I got blasted. I actually got DMs where it was like, "Go kill yourself," and I was like, "Okay, I will." I always respond to them too. I always make sure to respond to the suicide DMs because they're hilarious. Like I've probably had like 100 times where someone will DM me and they'll have like 4 followers following 20 accounts, and you look at the accounts they're following and they're all the usual suspects.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, "You should kill yourself. You're a disappointment." And then I'll be like, "Any recommendations?" And they don't answer.
No.
So.
Yeah, I love social media. I'm having a little bit too much fun sometimes. Don't know if you saw my tweet today. It was about Nick de Vries. It was called the 4 stages of Nick de Vries.
I did see it.
A thread, and it was 4 times the same argument about all the prizes that he won. And first, it was used to sort of boost him into that seat, and then it was to put him down because he should be getting points because he won all these prizes.
Yeah.
And then I can't believe Red Bull sacked him because he won all these prizes. And then the 4th one was, he'll have a career in motorsport because he won all these prizes. And that's how we went full circle again. But I think, the dynamics of the fans and then the dynamics around the sport, they interest me more sometimes than the actual technique. I try to watch a video from the race sometimes, or from Albert Fabregas, where they explain how the air goes through the Coke bottle area and goes into the diffuser and then gets spread into the blah, 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 and Venturi tunnels. But I lose interest. The technique and everything, it doesn't grab me. That's probably more for you.
I do love that stuff, yeah.
But if I hear an interview from a driver and you read between the lines where I can tell he's actually not happy with his teammate, or he's not happy with the team that he's in, or this and this is happening, then, I get my fantasy going, and then I sort of start predicting what might happen. And a lot of times I'm sort of right or in the right direction. So, but it's funny how everybody has their own joys out of the sport.
Yeah, like the technical stuff really does interest me a lot. When I saw the images of the floor on the Red Bull car, I was like, wow, I didn't even understand how it would work, because with my own car, obviously I'm not driving 300 kilometers an hour, so it's not relevant. But I have a skid plate to protect my oil pan because my car is lowered, and for speed obviously, but if I hit like a really deep pothole or a bump, I would obviously crack my oil pan. So I have a skid plate, and I started looking into it, and if the way like the aerodynamics works is if you have the air on the front of your car and it travels underneath and above, the air is weight in a way, right? So the longer the air stays above, the more downforce you have. So you want air to get out very quickly from the bottom of your car. So with my car, I actually have a custom plate that covers not just my oil pan, but it covers most of the openings under there, with the idea of, first of all, protecting my exhaust and like everything else, right? But the air is going to go in and just zoom underneath there now, so I'll get more downforce than I normally would have had. And with my car being all-wheel drive and a Subaru, not really, but it kind of is. I'll be able to take corners on tracks really, really well, really fast. I'll have that extra downforce that I wouldn't have had if I had left it just open. And when I look at Red Bull's floor, I see all these crazy contours and lines, and I'm wondering, how does this work? I guess they're just trying to get air out of the floor as fast as possible for more downforce. And then you start wondering, where's it going? Is it going to channel out and hit off the front of the rears? Like, that would be bad too. That's just more drag, right? So it's just, for me, the technical side, it's like these guys are geniuses, the way they come up with this stuff. It's stuff I couldn't even, understand. Oh, I think I'm back. Hopefully. There we go.
Yeah.
They're just crazy. Like the way they understand how air works, it's beyond. It's just such little fine margins that make the sport so interesting.
Yeah.
Even just, like braking, people wouldn't associate braking with speed, but it is, because the later you can brake, the more speed you can carry in, right?
Yeah.
The more your brakes are able to be cooled, the harder you can use them. There's ways that stuff that isn't directly related to speed at all is directly related to speed.
So talking about brakes, one of the late breakers is Daniel Ricciardo. So what are your expectations for him?
I don't have very high expectations for him right now. I know everyone's posting that lap time he did with the tire test, but there's so much context missing there. Obviously, the conditions were very different.
Well, I actually see, two girls that I did a podcast with. They're getting cooked for making these lap times Daniel Ricciardo did very important. So there's a lot of people actually hating on them because they made a short video about how these lap times would compare to other drivers that drove there or something,
Yeah. I think he'll do well, honestly. I don't think he's not going to do any worse than Nick did.
No.
But he's basically hopping into a machine that he hasn't driven yet.
No.
He's gonna take a couple races to get adjusted. Maybe he comes in and has a.
I think he used the AlphaTauri sim.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll
know some of the
I think
qualities.
he'll be okay. Like, he's obviously a world-class driver to be in Formula One.
And I think if the biggest flaws that the McLaren car had, the things that he couldn't work with, if that AlphaTauri doesn't have them, then he might be able to attract more out of it and be level with Yuki, or maybe even a little bit better.
I think it's a mental thing too. I think he's coming back with like a strong level of clarity more so than he would have had at the beginning of last year, right? Because high performance anything, whether it's athletics, anything like academic, anything that's high performance, it's so much of a mental game to be able to perform at that level, and they're asking a lot of a Formula One driver every time they get into the car. So I think with Daniel's state last year, I think he can only be better this year.
Yeah.
So I don't think he'll be this miracle. Like, I don't think he's going to win a race,
No.
but he'll do all right.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And I want to see him enjoy himself again. And, like last year when he was wearing his McLaren outfits, his face looked as papaya as his clothes. And just really, really unhappy. And that's not how we want to see Danny Rick. So we're getting to the point now where we're going to do a wild prediction.
Okay.
Have you thought about anything?
I don't know if my predictions that I thought of are like necessarily wild, but my prediction for the season's basically is if any Ferrari driver does win a race this year, it'll be Carlos. It won't be Charles.
Okay.
Um,
Explain.
just I just think that's funny because you see like a lot of Carlos hate on Twitter. Lots of people hate him for no reason, just because he's not Charles.
Yeah.
He's been driving fairly well this year, and I know Charles has had a lot of bad luck and some DNFs, and he's only just behind Carlos. But I think you look at the last race, the last couple races, Carlos was fine. And I think he'll be in a position where he's very assertive, and Charles is not. And I think he'll fight for the win before
I
Charles.
think Sainz is getting the brunt of the bad decisions Ferrari is making. You know, remember that double stacked pit stop that he didn't want to do, and then Leclerc had a 4.5 second pit stop, so he had to wait like a second and a half, and then his pit stop took 4.5 seconds as well, and he came out and he lost 7 places.
Yeah, no, I think if either of them win a race this year, it'll be Carlos. He's been good in qualifying as well.
Yeah.
I guess any other strange predictions I could think of would be, at one point I thought Russell was going to beat Hamilton again, but I don't think it'll happen now unless Lewis has a couple mechanical failures or something. Random race winners this year. I would love to see Norris win, so maybe I'll predict that. I'll say Norris will win one this year.
Okay. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, my wild prediction, and that's for this weekend then. Aston Martin are bringing a lot of upgrades, what I've read. And because they've been so quiet for the last 3 races, I think that's going to be a banger. And my prediction is Max wins the race, Alonso second, and Lance Stroll third. Double podium for Aston Martin.
That would be something.
Yes. And then for the next 22 races, we're not going to see anything of Lance Stroll again. And everybody that hates on Lance Stroll, they'll say, yeah, but he got a podium. He got a podium in Hungary in 2023. So he's really good. Because 5 years ago, he had a pole position in Turkey.
I don't know how I feel about Lance. Like, he's Canadian, so
you should support him.
I feel like I'm supposed to like him, but I don't cheer for him. Like,
no, he doesn't cheer for himself either.
He doesn't give me much reason to cheer for him. Not very good.
No, it's just
he's like
he always seems so bored as well.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder.
Do you remember that look that Paris Hilton used to give in when was she popular in the 2000s somewhere?
Yeah,
just that whole look of that. Well, that's the vibe I get off Lance Stroll. Whenever he's interviewed, he's like, "Yeah, I went okay today," and yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder, like guys like Stroll,
I would have slapped him. You know, wake
they're not good.
Fuck up.
I know you're in Formula One.
Yeah,
like, be happy. You know, like there's IndyCar drivers that are probably better than that guy. So,
yeah, I don't know much about IndyCar, but I try to stick with just one obsession. But the fact that Marcus Ericsson, who was pretty much a pay driver all his time in F1, can. He won the Indy 500, didn't he, last year? Yeah, that's IndyCar as well. Yeah.
Yeah, he won last year, and then this year he got Lewis Hamilton and Newgarden won at the end.
Oh, there was some stuff going on with safety cars and stuff.
Yeah, kind of at the end there. I'm not a huge IndyCar fan. I watch it, but I'm not invested.
So, did you enjoy this podcast?
Yeah, it's fun to talk about Formula One. I don't have many friends to talk to about Formula One. They just like hockey, so.
Well, we can do this without recording it, you know, if you ever feel the need.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to chat about F1.
Yeah. You know, maybe you can leave the poor people on Twitter alone then with your with your nasty tweets all the time.
No, that's not changing. I did one last night. It wasn't even a nasty tweet. It was just I made up a scenario that didn't happen, very clearly didn't happen, and I posted a picture of Max jogging, and I was like,
"Oh yeah, he set a new world record."
Yeah, for the 100-meter sprint, and if you go through the comments on there, there's probably like 5 or 6 comments where someone's like, "Is this real?" And I'm like, "Are you serious? You think this is real?" And like 3 nights ago, I tweeted just because I don't know, I have a lot of time when I'm working. Whenever we're not working, I'm just sitting around in the middle of nowhere. So I'll go on Twitter, and I tweeted something like, "Oh, I really appreciate Max because on one weekend he'll crash somebody out on a sim race on purpose, and then the next weekend he'll come win an F1 race, and he doesn't care." And there was probably like 20 comments in there from like Hamilton fans that were just like pure hate, like, "Oh, it's crazy, like how much hate I would get for that." And I'm like, I didn't even mention your driver. I just said I like the one I cheer for.
Yeah.
So I'm like living rent free in these people's heads or something, but it will not change. I will be tweeting random stuff and getting everyone going for the rest of my time on that platform.
Well, I'm glad I can tick off the Canadian box because this is the 7th nation I've visited now in my podcast. I need to be on the lookout for next month. I'll try to get a famous Dutch guy for the Dutch Grand Prix or something, That would be nice. But anyway, Damien, thanks very much. For the people at home that have Twitter and follow F1, his name is Clapped. And go give him a follow. And you can enjoy his hilarious tweets. And if he starts his YouTube channel about his car and building the car, I'll post that on my community post on my YouTube as well. So thanks very much. People, take care now. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye, Damien.